Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. I know the emission standards set by the Bureau of Ships and Services can be quite annoying, but it's good for the environment and it keeps the hyperspace lanes clean. I mean, I don't want to be flying through blobs or rocket fuel or dodging gamma rays from a leaky hyperdrive from a ship in front of me. And while not everyone can afford to buy a chromed-out Nubian yacht that runs on hyperpure plasma derived out of the tears of displaced Gungans, that doesn't mean we can't do proper maintenance to our ships and choose to be responsible spacers and keep the hyperspace lanes clean, not just for, ourselves, but also for those goddamn space whales and their spawn. Ugh. And if you take a look at how hypermatter fuel and reactor fuel continues to skyrocket, it's probably a good idea to start investing in a more fuel-efficient ship. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at some of the least efficient starships in the Star Wars galaxy, and you're going to really want to avoid these ships in the hyperspace lanes because, like I said, they're leaking fuel and radiation. Our first machine goes by many names: World Smasher, World Eater, Planet Smasher, City Eater, World Devastator, and so on. These legendary constructs of mass destruction were built for the Dark Empire and the reborn Emperor Palpatine, and they were seen by many as more efficient alternatives to the Death Star. Instead of just blowing up planets, they literally used a tractor beam to rip apart planets. These chunks of planet material are then fed to a massive molecular furnace inside of the ship, and that material is turned into raw resources and energy for a variety of different factories that are stationed on the World Devastator that create new ships, weapons, and vehicles. The inspiration behind this machine was the ancient Starforge created by the Rakatans. The only thing that was different about the Starforge was that instead of ingesting planets, it consumed entire stars. And as you can tell, due to the nature of its mission, the World Devastator has terrible emissions because it's eating planets. Stars and planetary systems might form all the time, but to destroy a garden planet or a habitable world is a crime to the entire galaxy. And once again, we see the Empire promising peace and stability, but acting like complete, total, chaotic gas clowns. Remember when Rey and Finn were trying to run away from a bunch of First Order Thae Fighters on Jakku? Well, the first ship they tried to run away in was a Tug B-13, otherwise known as a quad jumper. And by the looks of it, it does look like a really fast ship. It's essentially four gigantic jet turbine engines that has a tiny little cockpit strapped to it. You see, these quad jumpers were built for a very specific reason. They're basically the last mile transport used for orbital shipyards. These ships are designed to be incredibly powerful and quick. They basically push around these containers that are many times the ship size. In an industry with extremely tight margins and even stricter deadlines, every second matters in an orbital transfer yard, and so every bit of additional thrust makes the Tug B-13 even more valuable. And unlike most ships that use anti-gravity repulsor lifts to keep themselves aloft in atmosphere, the quad jumper actually uses 4 jet turbine engines, which is kind of beautiful. But it's also really bad for the environment compared to what else is out there. Fortunately for Rey and Finn, that quad jumper gets strafed by some surprisingly accurate laser fire from a First Order fighter pilot. The duo reroute and end up in a Corellian YT-1300 freighter, which interestingly enough also doubled as an orbital tugboat like the quad jumper. The prong in the front is supposed to be where containers would connect to the ship, and the offset cockpit allows the pilot to see where they're going. Like all Corellian freighters, the YT-1300s were commonly modified by their owners. But on the YT-1300 model, pilots usually did not modify the engines, which were a set of RSRB-42 Sunlight engines. They fit directly into the chassis and are custom made for the model and relatively hard to find replacements for. It was also extremely powerful for a stock engine. It could haul a lot of weight. Remember, these things were tugboats. Now, Han Solo, Lando Calrissian, and whoever owned this ship before them did put a lot of modifications into the Falcon in almost every other area aside from the engines, including a sunlight acceleration motor, or SLAM, that reroutes energy from the weapon systems directly to the thrusters, a state-of-the-art ISU Sim SSP-05 hyperdrive, which is already rated as Class 1.0, but Han Solo had it jury-rigged, Van den Ganten style, which gives it a rating of Class 0.5, making it essentially one of the fastest hyperspace traveling ships in the galaxy. The trade-off is this hyperdrive is kind of patched together and has a very high failure rate. The Millennium Falcon was essentially a hot rod by the time Han Solo got his hands on the ship, and the lack of credits and heavy wear and tear meant that as formidable as the Millennium Falcon was, it was always one jump from falling apart. And while Han Solo cared a lot about how fast his ship could go, he probably didn't care as much about emissions. The hard-sell-class Interstellar Transport was more than just a ship. It was a status symbol, the Mercedes S-Class for techno-union execs who had proved their value to the company. At 220 meters in height and made with a titanium hull, this was a rather unorthodox built ship. It was designed for both luxurious and fast travel thanks to a well-appointed interior and a Class 1 hyperdrive. It also had a large cargo capacity, which allowed it to carry a decent amount of freight. This allows techno-union execs to wine and dine their clients in a luxurious environment, and also they can carry a lot of contraband, like a lot. But the most retro and unique part of this vessel is the fact that it didn't use repulsor lifts while in atmosphere. Instead, it relied on several chemical rockets. Combine that with an upright landing and takeoff position, and you have a ship that is quite similar to the ones used by space programs here on Earth. Either way, the lack of repulsor lifts means that the hard-sell Interstellar Transport is going to have some of the worst emissions on this list. As awesome as jet turbine engines are, chemical rockets are even more awesome, and therefore have worse emissions. You would think that smaller vehicles would always have worse emissions than larger vehicles, but if you take a look at internal combustion engine vehicles here on Earth, that simply is not the case. Motorcycles, despite being more fuel efficient, typically have worse emissions in some categories than cars, simply because there's less room to put on a bunch of mufflers, catalytic converters on a motorcycle when compared to a car. The same concept applies to starships. The smaller, the lighter a starship is, the less room there is going to be for, baffles and other kind of insulation for the emissions. Take the RZ-1 Awing, for example, the fastest interceptor used by either side of the Galactic Civil War. It was piloted by the most daring Rebel Alliance pilots, and they had a tendency to tinker with their ships and try to squeeze as much thrust out of the engines as possible. Some Awing pilots even removed the shield generators on board and rerouted the power to the engines to get ahead of the competition. But even when the Empire released their own A-Wing Challenger, the Thae Interceptor, the RZ-1 still maintained a healthy advantage in the speed department, and also in the emissions department as well. This thing is basically two giant engines with a small person strapped onto it. It means there's no room for emissions control. The Thae in Thae Fighter stands for twin ion engine, the propulsion system that this entire line is built off of. The engine itself is an engineering marvel. It's perfected for mass manufacturing and has no moving parts, making it one of the most reliable engines ever made and extremely easy to maintain. The Thae inline starfighters also had 12 solar collectors, aka solar panels, arranged on its S-foils, which collect power for the power plant. The Thae Fighter technically has very clean emissions compared to many of the ships on this list, but those S-foils also make the ship extremely unwieldy in atmosphere. The Thae Fighter's complete lack of aerodynamics can wreak havoc with the ship's fuel efficiency and flight capabilities. So I guess it doesn't matter how efficient your propulsion system is, getting a brick to fly in atmosphere is still getting a brick to fly in atmosphere. The N-1 Starfighter was developed by the Thae Palace Space Vessel Engineering Corps for the Royal Naboo Security Forces. As mentioned before, the Naboo are known for their bougie taste in starships along with their super pure and clean burning plasma. And most N-1 Starfighters should have fairly clean emissions as a result. It's one of the selling points of Naboo plasma. But when Din Djarin's Hoopty, the Razor Crest, finally gets destroyed, he ends up going to his mechanic pal, Pelimoto, who has an amazing taste of retro starfighters, and together they rebuild a N-1 Starfighter from salvage parts. In true Mandalorian fashion, the duo replaced the original laser cannons with larger laser cannons, and then removed the engine cowls from the thrusters and several panels from the fuselage. They would then acquire a turbonic Venturi power simulator from some Jawa scavs to boost the engine's power, along with a cryogenic density combustion booster, also provided by the Jawas, who actually stole it from a Pike repulsor train. The only thing I ever see people take from trains and put onto their cars are like the horns, so whatever this is, it's going to be way too large and way too powerful for a starship. Moto would then add a Kenzo switch, which allowed the pilot to adjust the induction intake charger on the engine, giving the thrusters a very unnatural acceleration. It was so fast that when Din Djarin was pulled over by a pair of New Republic Rangers, they thought he had jumped into hyperspace when he kicked on the Kenzo switch on his sublight engines. Whatever this N-1 used to be, it no longer is. This is the Star Wars equivalent of a Prius getting a LS swap, a legendary and mythical and beautiful vehicle that has poor emissions. Uglies is a specific term for a class of starships that were predominantly seen in use during the Galactic Civil War, and they're called uglies because they're usually cobbled together from multiple starships. Like this Y-Wing and Thae Fighter mashup known as a Y-Tie, or the Z-95 Headhunter mashed up with a Tie Interceptor known as a Z-Scepter. Uglies belong on this list for the same reason why the Millennium Falcon and Endurance N1 are here. Mismatched parts, aftermarket modifications, and everything that comes along with these more creative builds means less efficient starfighters with worse emissions. Although with these uglies, I'm less worried about radiation leaks and fuel leaks. I'm more worried about them breaking apart while entering atmosphere. The CR-90 is a ridiculous ship. At just 150 meters in length, it really has no business having 11 ion turbine drives at the rear. But I guess given who the clientele is for this ship, there's a reason why Carillion Engineering Corporation designed it this way. You see, the CR-90 was designed primarily as a diplomatic vessel, and so it needed to be incredibly fast and capable of outrunning any enemy that stood in its way, even if that means blasting past a blockade, which it did quite well. As a matter of fact, the CR-90 would be known as the blockade runner during the Galactic Civil War thanks to its exploits. With a sublight speed of 81 megalights per hour, it's faster than a Y-Wing, which is around 70 megalights per hour, and a bit slower than an X-Wing, which is around 100 megalights per hour. That makes the CR-90 ridiculously fast, considering that it was used as a capital ship by the Rebel Alliance. However, from an emission standpoint, it's kind of hard to hide 11 ion turbine engines and all of the energy they emit. Also, this specific model was prone to leaking radiation from its hyperdrive, which is what happened to the CR-90 Corvette known as the Thunderstruck. It was being used by a Twilight Company, a Rebel Army unit, and it was very easy to track them because of this deficiency. So there you have it, guys. That's our list of some of the least efficient starships in the Star Wars galaxy. Let me know in the comment section below if I've missed any of your favorite terrible emissions vehicles. Okay, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy. See you next time.